Don't come with expectations. That's what everyone says about everywhere, about everything. Expectations are seen as the breeding ground of resentment, the prelude to disappointment, but sometimes it's just impossible not to have them, and Japan is one of those instances. It has simply informed too much of our popular imagination and cultural consciousness to be a blank slate. Music, animes, video games, art styles, architecture, history, language, fashion. If I put the word Japanese in front of any of these, you get a visual, you get an impression and a sense of recognition. We have too much of an idea of what Japan is to not travel to it without some preconceived notion about what it should be like, especially for a city as iconic as Tokyo. So yes, I came to Japan, to Tokyo, for the first time with expectations. Pretty high ones. Not only because of all the pop culture influence, but also because of the fact that this is a trip I've been wanting to take for nigh on a decade now. My expectations had a time element fueling them. I had purposely put off coming to Japan for the first time until I was able to do it quote-unquote right, which by my standards meant having enough time and having enough money to enjoy it properly. And this year, now having finished my master's degree and working in a job that's remote-based and time zone flexible-ish, I realized I had the opportunity to take full advantage of being on a Japanese tourist visa. So I booked a trip for 85 out of an allowable 90 days that kicked off in Tokyo. Hello from Tokyo. Okay. I arrived at Haneda Airport at 5 in the morning. The plane had landed in the dark and in the rain, and I was a bit upset that I had been denied that aerial first impression. Customs was straightforward, and I grabbed a taxi where I was introduced in Japanese advertising, and I spent the drive to Shinjuku looking out the window. The city was gray and quiet and tall. For my time in Tokyo, I would be staying in Kabukicho. Not near Kabukicho, not next to Kabukicho, in Kabukicho. Known as the world's safest red light district, Kabukicho would be my home away from home for a month. And as one might imagine, it was in fact a very weird place to stay. The glare of neon and the people out at all hours, host and hostess clubs advertising on every available surface, scammers and girls trying to entice you up to clubs or out to bars, and Godzilla watching over it all. It gave a very fever dream quality to my day-to-day life. The reason why I was staying in this area was because I was crossing off a bucket list item. I was staying in a concept hotel called Book in Bed, and the idea was that you got to experience what it was like to live in a bookstore and sleep among the stacks. It was so beautiful, and as a bibliophile, somebody who used to work in a bookstore, this was like an aesthetic and identity dream come true. And maybe it was because of the ambiance, the bookstore ambiance was influencing everybody's behavior, but throughout my stay, I found that all of the guests were always respectful and quiet, with like maybe one exception. The facilities were nice and the common space was a delight to be in, and the bunks, while objectively nothing more special than sleeping in a box, had enough space to sit up in, stretch out in, and keep my stuff in. So I was able to make it work for the month I was there. My one complaint is that the mattresses were way too thin for a side sleeper like me. On my first day in Tokyo, I went to Shinjuku Gyoen Park. It was raining, but that didn't stop me, and it has to be said that when I was originally planning this trip, I hadn't intended to do it during sakura season, but once I realized that it would overlap with cherry blossom season, oh my god, I was overjoyed. My anticipation ramped even higher, and as you can see, the blooms were already mounting up. They were a bit early for the season, but they were timed perfectly for my arrival. And so I was in this huge park with Japanese gardens, looking at cherry blossoms in Shinjuku, in the rain, and the moment was just so easy to romanticize. I hadn't even been in Japan for 5 hours at this point, But I remember just having this moment of, is this what love at first sight feels like? You know, at this point in my life, I've come to realize that my romantic affairs have always been with cities. I'm not a very romantically inclined person towards people and would even go as far to say that I'm aromantic. But with cities, I dress up for cities. They're who I spend my days thinking about, whose impression of me I care about the most, and who I take the most care to make a good impression on. They're who I spend the most money on. They're who I receive flowers from. What I orbit my life around. I adjust my schedule to their schedule. I read once that when you love something, you want to know it all the way down. Through that lens, my master's degree in urbanization can accurately be read as an act of devotion. So, I've fallen in love with some fantastic cities and have even had the good fortune of a few of them loving me back. But I can confidently say I have never fallen as hard or as fast as I fell for Tokyo. This preventable moment is brought to you by Google. The Imperial Palace is closed today. A quick Google search would have made that known to me, but a reason to come back later. It is very pretty here. So yeah, this seems like a nice place to be. So I'll spend the rest of my afternoon here, and then head back to Shinjuku in the evening, and maybe try and find a little local bar when I get back. Obviously, the food. I mean, there's not much I can say that hasn't already been said. Japanese food is pretty good. I will say, coming in as somebody who grew up in the desert and didn't have a lot of exposure to seafood, and only recently started eating seafood at a serious level circa like 18, I was worried about, how many options would be available to me, and if I would feel like I was missing out on a lot of culinary experiences, because I can do like sashimi if it's like a standard fish trademarked, if it's a salmon, if it's a tuna, but once we get into like squid and oysters and things like that, I have to bow out, I can't lie. And so I was wondering what it would be like for me in Japan, but I had no need to worry. There were plenty of culinary experiences that I got to indulge in, and boy, did I indulge. Like, it's aesthetically oriented food a lot of the time, which is something that I really appreciate and I think really adds to the experience. Second, obviously, it's delicious. Third, it was pretty reasonably priced. You could have some really, really fantastic food for not that much money. It's interesting because when I was traveling in Spain, I met this girl. We befriended each other, and she is Japanese. And she told me that in Japan, cheap doesn't mean bad, like how it does in America. When you say cheap food in America, it's not going to be of quality that you're like super jazzed to eat, but you'll eat it anyway out of nostalgia or necessity. But in Japan, cheap food is just cheap. That's literally the only metric of it. And it's still good. Like, you could still have great convenience store food. And I did a lot of the time. I will say, one caveat to this experience is that I definitely left Tokyo with a vitamin deficiency, mainly because since I was staying in a hostel, I didn't have like a kitchen or a fridge available to me, and so all of my food was eaten out. So I was able to cover like carbs, protein, sugar, no problem. Fruits and vegetables, though, I definitely had to make more of an intentional effort to get those in the rotation, and I wasn't always able to. But that aside, next time I know to bring a multivitamin, but man, yeah, no, the food, thumbs up. The beverages, though, as a certified beverage bitch, Japan fulfilled me in a way that nobody will probably ever be able to match. Like, I don't think I will ever have as gratifying an experience as I did amongst Japanese beverage options because of how many options there are. And also, I kept count, and I had exactly a million bajillion matchas while I was there. I am not only a beverage bitch, I am a tea bitch. I wouldn't go so far as to say a connoisseur, but I'm like one level below it. I take my tea seriously, and so being in Japan and having access to matcha and all kinds of amazing teas, just like heavy breathing, like really intense feelings about the situation. So yeah, yep. I can confirm that even if you just go for the food and nothing else, even if there was no cultural activity or historical activity or sightseeing on the itinerary, even just going for the food, worth it.